Welcome to World War II, Both Sides of the Wire, the podcast where we lift the lid, bust the myths, and explore the incredible history of the Second World War from the Allied and Axis perspectives. I'm Jesse Alexander, a public historian specializing in the history of the two world wars.
And I am Matthias Strohn, German officer, professor of military studies, and author. In this week's episode, we continue with and bring to an end the fascinating and also gruesome story of the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. Hi, Jesse, and Dan, I should say, because Dan is joining us again. Another week, another podcast. Here we are again. So, Jesse, where are we in the story at the moment, and where do we need to take it from here?
All right. Well, thanks to Dan for joining us once again. And thanks to Dan, we are in the thick of the story of the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. And I think we will hit the ground running here. We'll jump right back into the story until we come to the dramatic conclusion of it all and tragic conclusion of it all, given the coming reprisals, if you allow me a little spoiler alert. So Dan, take us back into the story of Heydrich.
I mean, I've heard a lot of numbers bandied around about how many casualties or how many deaths are sustained as a result of Heydrich's. It's ultimately going to lead to a massacre at a place called Lidice, which is, and also Ledecky as well. There's reprisal efforts even in Berlin as a result of this. You know, some people say 5, some people say 10,000 lives. It's a staggering amount, but it's also got quite long legs, this event, so it goes on. You know, the repercussions are seen for months. But for the time being, at least, those 4 men who have escaped into the city of Prague have got some, you know, they've stirred the hornet's nest. And it's not just those 4 guys, it's also those other agents who've been in Prague doing other stuff. They're also in the crosshairs as well now. So in total, we get 7 individuals in 7 different safe houses who are having to be continually rotated as the SS, now up to 21,000 SS and German, the Prague Watch Battalion, amongst others, have been brought into the area. They're going to be basically squeezing the city to try and make it, try and see if something will kind of wiggle loose and give them that thread that they need in order to capture the first and then therefore all of the assassins. The pressure is building incredibly high, but at least for the first few days, incredibly, the resistance holds firm, and there are no leaks. There's no further information gathered. Nobody comes forward at this with these enormous rewards. Nobody buckles under interrogation and gives away a vital bit of information, although there's certainly a lot of that kind of thing going on. But the pressure is just ramping up and up and up. And actually, it's Uncle Heysky, Jan Zelenska Heysky, the local resistance leader, who makes the decision, we need to put all our eggs in one basket here. Because if we keep 7 different eggs in 7 different baskets, eventually one of them is going to get found. So let's try and put everybody in the same spot. And they decide that spot is going to be St. Cyril and St. Methodius Church in the heart of Prague, which is an Eastern Orthodox church in what you've rightly corrected me on last episode, Jesse, is a largely Catholic country. This is a church with a man by the name of Dr. Petchek, who is absolutely friendly to the Czech patriotic cause, and is willing to risk his own life to house and shelter these 7 men. So if I think from the 31st of May through to about the 2nd of June 1942, 7 agents, including Gabčík, Kubiš, Valčík, Opalka, and 3 others are going to arrive in this church, and they're going to hide in the crypt, whilst Prague is effectively turned upside down and has its pockets shaken out across the floor because the pressure is getting so intense on the people around him. Now, ultimately, it's going to be Kubiš who's going to bring that house of cards down. But at least for the time being, even though all of this is going on, as far as everybody's concerned at the moment, job was still a failure.
Absolutely, because they don't know that Heydrich is mortally wounded. Well, we know that he dies later on. He's being treated in hospital, and it's not looking all that good. And as you say, well, there's the hornet's nest. The hornets are out. And of course, they're now trying to root out the underlying issues and the underlying problems that, from a German point of view, you find in this particular part of the world. I mean, if we lift it up for 1 second, perhaps, and take it back a little bit more to the strategic level before we zoom in again and look more at the personal stories and then talk about what actually happens in the church and afterwards as well. I mean, this entire area, so Bourbon und Mähren, as the Germans would have called it, is extremely important for the German war effort. And that is because of the industrial output that you find there. So everybody who drives a Skoda car today, well, this is the factory that produced tanks. And in the early stages of World War II, these Skoda tanks were basically the T-38. The Germans put a little T in brackets behind it for Czechoslovakia, German spelled with a T. These were the best tanks they had in large numbers. So it's really important. And it's also the reason why Heydrich is brought in the first place, because the first guy to run this area when it's taken over by the Germans is a chap called Neurath. Neurath is a career diplomat. He was the foreign minister of the German Empire. He's sacked by Hitler because he's not good enough, he's not Nazi enough, not efficient enough, and he's given that area to run. And the Nazis think he's not efficient enough. There's always the carrot and the stick approach. And they think Neurath is using too much of the carrot. He's too nice to these people. As a consequence of that, productivity in the weapons factories, and that's the only thing the Germans really care about in this area, drops. That's the main reason why Heydrich comes in. And he uses the carrot and the stick. So the first thing he does when he arrives is, while he has lots of people arrested, several thousand, he has about 150, roughly speaking, I think. Can't remember the exact figure, executed pretty much on the spot. But what he also does is he then uses the carrot. For example, one of the very first things he also does is he increases the food rationing of these workers. And he's quite open about it, and he says, well, we need these guys right now because they're working for us. We can either turn them into proper Germans, and if not, we'll deal with them after we've won the war. And there is a bit of an argument, coming back to everything that you said about the butcher's shop and people giving other people up. And I've heard this argument made a number of times. I'd be interested in your view, that this is also the reason why Heydrich and this part of the world was chosen for this assassination site, because the Allies were a bit too worried that the German approach was working. And they were getting too much support from the people in Prague and in this area on the whole. Because again, when you look at the searches and you talked about searching basically the entire city, you can't just do that with the German military, with the German Gestapo, with the German police, wherever there. You need to have the input from the population. You mentioned a number of examples where they actually work together with the Germans. Because that's also linked to the more tactical personal story we'll return to in a minute. So I'd just be interested in your view of whether you think that there's a kernel of truth in this or not at all.
I think absolutely there is, and I don't think it's unique to Bohemia and Moravia where we're talking about right now either. Where I'm located down in the south of France, it's big Milise territory during the war, and whilst we like to focus on the perhaps 1% of active resistors pre-D-Day, let's call it, we very rarely talk about the 2 or 3% of active collaborators, at the same time period, or the big chunk in the middle who are somewhere along that very broad and sliding spectrum. And I think the same thing applies in Prague, absolutely. In fact, we know it does, because very actively involved in that searching, and more than just, I will go because I'm being told to go, but rather very active are the Prague police. And even in the siege that is going to come at the end of this remarkable yet sadly tragic story, there's extremely active, proactive, you might say, involvement of the Czech Fire Brigade. So, we do have, there is absolutely something in what you say. But, by the same token as well, I don't want to take away from the fact that the men that are out here, those same Czechs themselves, have clearly gone out here knowing damn well that actually what ultimately does transpire is very likely going to happen. And that's that they're going to give up their own lives in exchange for Reinhard Heydrich's. They don't get to experience the end result of what happens. But what they do get to learn, which I think is quite powerful, and they only get to learn this secondhand, because remember that by the 1st of June, these 7 agents are basically closed off inside a literal crypt underneath a church, which is, completely sealed off from the world around them. What they don't know, but they later find out, is that about 4:30 in the morning on the 4th of June, so what was it, about 10 days 27th of May to the 4th of June. After Heydrich has been wounded, he's actually gone downhill pretty substantially. He's had his spleen removed, and infection has taken hold. And despite he's been conscious, we think, up until at least the 2nd of June. He's had visitors. He's had Himmler's come and see him. He's had Frank. He's had various other very key Nazi figures have come and seen him. His wife comes in on a daily basis. She even reports on the 3rd of June that he seems to be doing better. But he's slipped into a coma since then. Infection's taken hold, and despite multiple blood transfusions, Reinhard Heydrich, about 4:30 in the morning on the 4th of June, 1942, basically dies, just expires there. It's totally against the run of play. Up until the last final hours, nobody's expecting that. And these guys in the church probably find out 2 or 3 days later that Heydrich has been killed. They also, unfortunately, find out about the impact of that because they find out secondhand of the Lidice massacre whilst they're still in the crypt. But one of the most powerful things that I find about this whole story, I've never seen it officially written in documents, but it's a well-attested part of the story. And I think it gives you an idea of just how determined all of these agents were. Is there is a plan to go into the main park in Prague just after Heydrich has died, so around the 4th, 5th of June, with a placard saying that they are the executors of Reinhard Heydrich, and to commit suicide together in the park next to this sign, in an attempt to try and stop these reprisals against their countrymen. If you want to ask me about bravery, I think that's a pretty strong case of it.
I would say that ranks higher on my scale of bravery than being the Nazi governor in an occupied province and driving in an open-top sports car.
Yeah, I mean, it's it ultimately, of course, doesn't come to pass that way. That probably convinced otherwise. So ultimately, it's decided that execution or suicide in the park isn't going to be the way forward. In fact, plans are put pretty quickly aside that we're going to get these guys out of Prague instead. And so the plan from memory is about the 19th of July that the men are going to be taken out of Prague and returned back to the UK via aircraft. Unfortunately, what's not known is that on the 15th of June, a man by the name of Karol Czorda, who is one of the agents, whilst 7 of the agents have stayed in the city when Heydrich's assassination attempt was made, and they've carried on this kind of rotation. Czorda, in fact, has left Prague and has gone to his mother's house. And there's a big controversy about this today. Probably pressure from his parents. Certainly concern after the Lidice massacre that his village, if he's found to be there and involved, is going to suffer the same fate. Whatever reason, Czorda decides that he's going to go in and meet with the Gestapo head in Prague in the place we call the Petchik Palace. And he gives up the whole shooting match. He says, I've seen the suitcase, particularly the attaché case with the Sten gun in it. I've seen that in the hand of another parachutist. I'm a parachutist myself. The man was named Gabčík, and he describes the insides of it. He says there was a magazine pouch here. The Sten was attached to this part. And he gives a load of detail that only somebody involved could know. And he says, I can't guarantee it, but I think probably the other assassin you were looking for is his best friend, Kubiš. That changes everything. As a result, finally now the Gestapo, who are desperate to get some information, so far have had nothing, have got that first lead. And it ultimately ends up with a whole bunch of dominoes falling. At the same time as doing that, Czorda says, I was also in these various safe houses during my time in Prague. One of which he gives up is the Moravec family. So Mother Maria Moravec, and you alluded to this earlier, Jesse, she is basically the Gestapo kick her door down. Her and her son, Vlastimil, or Ata as he's known, are in the house at the time. Gestapo come in, arrest them and say, right, you're going to come down with us and we're going to find out what you really know. She denies any information. She then asks if she can go to the bathroom before she leaves, at which point she locks the door and takes cyanide. And she ends her life, stays silent to the end, which I think in itself is extremely powerful. Unfortunately, Ata tries to do the same thing but isn't successful. So mum commits suicide, son tries it but isn't successful. and is now in the hands of the Gestapo. And as you can imagine, over a relatively short period of time, they apply some extremely severe pressure to him. Interestingly, including lots of alcohol, they ply him, getting blind drunk. And there's a story that goes here that has not really been substantiated, although there are various reliable sources that mention it. And they say the reason that Artur Morovic breaks is because the Gestapo chief in Prague takes in a fish tank with his mother's decapitated head in and puts it on the desk in front of young Artur. And it's simply too much for him. And by about midnight on the 17th, 18th, information about where these agents is held, and a big operation is brought in. It's all of a sudden it's time to get over to the church and crush these guys once and for all.
I mean, it's hard to judge or criticize how people react in those situations, right? I mean, that's an inhuman amount of pressure to be under, and I think it's kind of understandable, especially for a younger person in those circumstances. It's never good when the end of the result of that is that other people lose their lives, but these are the most extreme kind of human conditions in war, and it calls not only for, I think, recognizing courage, recognizing evil, but also some empathy. When people have tried to do the right thing and end up with totally understandable human limitations. At least that's what I was thinking about when I first became familiar with the story of that family in that safe house and the fishbowl and all of that. In any case, the result of that is a final showdown at this church, Dan.
Yeah, and by about 4:00 in the morning on that final day, the SS have brought in something, it's like 700 SS troops now, have surrounded in a double cordon. So they've got one much wider cordon and then one close cordon around the block and then the particular church, St. Cyril and St. Methodius Church. And it's clear that there's no way that these guys are leaving. It's just what's going to happen before they're finally brought to bay and whether any of them are going to come out of this alive. What we do know is that really for about almost 2 weeks, the agents have been taking it in turns, with 3 men on effectively sentry duty in this closed church up on the top part, so on the floor overlooking the main church ground. Overlooking the main church nave, and then underground at any given time are the other 4 agents who are resting in a crypt. So effectively we've got 3 floors. We've got the crypt underground, we've got the nave, the main church floor, and then we've got the choir and the overlooking areas, which is where those men are gonna hold out. And two fights take place. First of all, the Gestapo, with a guard of about 25 SS men, are going to try and make their way into the church. They come in through a door by the altar, and they get opened fire on with one man by the name of Kurt Carlo, a Gestapo man, gets wounded in the left hand. They go scurrying out because they've been hit by what we sometimes call a hail of fire. And I hesitate to use that because there are 7 pistols in hands of 7 agents here. I think the heaviest caliber is a 9mm, and probably they've got a pocket full of rounds each. That we're not talking about a very brutal, close range, heavy firefight, at least from one side of the equation. On the other side, of course, on the German side, there's unlimited weaponry available effectively. But nevertheless, despite that huge disparity in numbers and firepower, for 2 hours, there's a brutal fight that goes on that sees the 3 men who were on guard duty at the time in the shape of Jan Kubisch, Adolf Palka, and a man by the name of Josef Bublik. They fight from the top of the church to try and hold off one particular access. There's a spiral staircase that leads upstairs, and they concentrate their fire around that staircase. If they can hold the staircase, they're relatively safe. But the Germans, the SS, in fact, the Prague Wacht Battalion, one, they're experienced, and secondly, they've just got unlimited resources. And so 100 stick grenades and 1,000 rounds later, all 3 of the men are wounded. Opalka, we know for sure, who's right at the top of the staircase. Maybe we can chuck a picture up even. He is badly wounded, gets his right arm shattered by a grenade fragment, and with his very last bullet, takes his own life. Josef Bublik does exactly the same thing, only a handful of yards away, probably a few minutes later. He gets his one half of his body shredded by innumerable fragments from a grenade blast, and he ends his own life. The only man who's unable to do so is Jan Kubiš, one of the original two assassins, who's probably incapacitated, very likely unconscious. He, in a strange way, fortunately for him, dies of blood loss on the way to hospital. But these three men, and there's a really tragic postscript to this, because we're talking, there's two actions here. You've got the one in the church where the SS are turning up and they're expecting to find two blokes, Kubiš and Gabčík. They find three, which is worrying. And then the really tragic thing about this is that they find at least 4 sets of clothing in the upstairs part of the church. According to the Gestapo commander, by the way, I need to reflect on this. SS commander is von Treuenfeld. I think it's Panowitz, the Gestapo commander. He is the man that makes the initial attempt to get in. According to his report, and something unusual about this, we'll maybe come back to in a moment, he mentions that they when they find this extra set of clothing, they decide they're going to search the rest of the church just in case there's a fourth man. What they don't know at that time is there are 4 additional men in the crypt underneath who have kept quiet, hoping that after this fight they go away and they can maybe get away with this. Tragically, that's not going to be the case.
Well, this, of course, is an absolutely fascinating and also a horrible story, you might say, when you look at the individuals and their fates that you've just described, Dan. And sometimes you might get this feeling and this idea that what the Germans are doing and these countermeasures are all extremely efficient, very Germanic, you might say, and everything runs like clockwork. That, of course, is not the case. This is a big operation, and of course, the big problem that you find in the Nazi state throughout is that you've got so many different factions, so many different organizations that sometimes work together, sometimes against each other as well. And that is being played out here in this episode as well, as they're trying to find these assassins. So you've got the SS coming in. You mentioned von Treuenfeld. He's the commander of the Waffen-SS in this area. And that means they're basically military personnel, of course, highly indoctrinated, believing in the Nazi cause. But in essence, these guys are military units. For argument's sake, let's keep it a bit simplistic here. And they're doing what military people do at that time. So they go around, they're applying military means, they're applying military doctrine, they're kicking doors, doing whatever. The same time, of course, for example, you've got the Gestapo, and that, of course, that's intelligence, that's secret police. They do things in a very different way. And we were chatting about this earlier, and you mentioned that you've got these 2 reports as well, both from the SS and from the Gestapo, both blaming one another. But what are they doing here? Why are they behaving like this? Why are they going around kicking in doors? We should be doing it in a very, very different way. So you can see all sorts of problems on the German side as well. That, of course, unfortunately, in the end, does not help the guys you just talked about. So that's very unfortunate. Does it help the remaining people? Because we haven't talked about all the assassins yet. What's happening to them?
Well, it's a really good point, and it could have done is the truth, because the SS von Treuenfeld's report says that they weren't even aware of the presence of a crypt underneath the main church. So had it not been for what the Gestapo later claimed, Panowitz in his report says, well, we knew about it all the time, just nobody asked us. So there's this kind of back and forth where there's an argument, and the reason that the Gestapo say they know it is because they actually interrogated on the spot Dr. Petschek, who was the priest of the church who revealed that there was a crypt. I don't think he revealed there were people in it, but it's very soon found out that that's the case. This crypt is about 60 feet long. It's slightly unusual. I do have to spend 2 minutes describing it, because ordinarily there would be a large staircase down which, in hundreds of years earlier, you would have taken coffins of those prepared for burial, effectively. That staircase and that main entrance has long been covered over with a big, heavy slab, so it's not been accessed for a long time. What there is almost a little escape hatch, a little vertical 2 foot by 2 foot square hatch, which leads down into the crypt, which makes, at this point, only one way in and one way out. Now, the reason that the 4 Czech agents in the crypt didn't try and get involved in the fight when their 3 mates upstairs were effectively fighting for their lives is that exit comes out right next to the front door of the church, which is actually where the SS were fighting them. So had they lifted that hatch and tried to join the fighting in the church, they would have found they've got 25 SS blokes looking down at them saying, what the hell is going on here? So that's why you get this disparity, this split of the fight. Ultimately, somebody does find out that there are 4 more agents and that they are in the church. In fact, Karol Czorda is brought to the site and he's told to shout in through the one window which accesses the street outside. Very famous window if you ever go to Prague. He shouts in and says something along the lines of, look, I'm here. I've been treated really well. If you come out, I've been told you'll be treated as prisoners of war. But nobody's falling for that. They apparently throw their only Molotov cocktail and fire a small barrage of shots at him, and he quickly retreats with the understanding that he's probably for the first time they've discovered exactly how they've been betrayed. What happens next over the course of 4 more hours, believe it or not, with these 4 guys is various attempts to try and force the agents out. So first of all, the SS try and lower somebody down on a rope down this 2-foot by 2-foot passage. They get down. Effectively, what they do is they lower a sacrificial lamb down into a crypt, probably with all 4 blokes pointing a pistol directly at him. Inevitably, he gets shot several times. He gets pulled back up with quite heavy wounding. And then Karlheim and Frank, who's the guy outside, the effectively Heydrich's replacement, who's furious about this thing. He's the senior Nazi official in the country right now. He says, I want these guys out and I want them out today. And so they call in the Czech fire brigade, who are going to use this window now to fill it full of fire hoses and basically fill the crypt up, drown them out, flood these guys out. A whole manner of small moments pass here where the agents decide to try and slice the sides of the hoses to minimize the pressure. They use a ladder to climb up and reach the window, which is actually about 9 foot high, and push those out. Germans try and insert smoke into there and tear gas. That gets chucked back out. There's continual fighting, but all the time the water's rising, the ammunition's going lower, and these guys are surrounded by 700 SS. There is no way that this ends. It's just how and when. There's no question about exactly what the ultimate outcome will be. But the bravery these guys display is incredible. I think most famously shown by the phrase, when asked to surrender, we are Czechs, we'll never surrender, never. Simple classic line that's kind of embedded into Czech Second World War history. Ultimately, though, it's a futile attempt, and when the fire brigade finally managed to hook the ladder from outside, they somehow distract the 4 agents. Somebody gets in a grappling hook and they manage to hook onto the ladder and drag that out. As soon as that ladder comes out of the window, the now 9 foot high entrance where the hoses were coming in is now unreachable. So there's no way of trying to push hoses out, and it's the beginning of the end, effectively. There's no way to stop what's going to happen. And just as the point that the SS finally find and break the old stone slab that led to the main stairway, 4 shots ring out. And those 4 shots signal the end of this siege, because each of those 4 men has used their last round to take their own lives. And it brings to an end incredible, for me at least, an extremely powerful episode in the story of the Second World War. One that's it's full of tragedy in many different ways, but also I think highlights the personal bravery that a lot of people show.
And of course, not only do you have the particular story that you in so much detail shared with us, but of course there's an aftermath of this as well. There's more happening. We probably don't have time to go into all the depth and detail now, but I think you already mentioned the name earlier in conversation, the famous word of that famous place, Lidice, which is completely destroyed and lots of people killed by the Germans as a reaction to the assassination of Heydrich, because the Germans thought that the people there had supported the assassination attempt, had put people into hiding. So, and of course, that word Lidice is one of these words that remind everybody of the nastiness of that particular regime. So you can take this even further if you want. We'd be another 2 or 3 hours talking about the wider consequences and the even more brutal killing and brutal behavior in that part of the world at that particular time. So an absolutely, what's the right word? Awful story with, in many ways, an awful end.
Yeah, no question. I mean, the cost to the people of Bohemia and Moravia of this operation is very substantial. We have these two, there's another less famous village that the Germans choose to destroy and massacre people at as a part of a reprisal. There's the more famous village of Lidice, but there's a smaller one, I believe, called Lejaki. And not only do they massacre people there, but they send others to concentration camps. There are different estimates. I think maybe, Dan, you referred to this earlier, but they're well into the thousands, something like 5,000 dead, maybe 13,000 arrested. Kupisch's girlfriend gets sent to a concentration camp, dies there. The bishop responsible for the church where the shootout happens, he and the priests are arrested and they're executed. And they are executed is the end of the story, the end of the biography for many thousands of people as a result of this operation. So that leads me to maybe what's a final question, which is essentially, is it worth it, right? So the Czechs and Brits, they managed to achieve their immediate, let's say, tactical goal, which is to kill someone from the other side who's important. Their political goal is to show that they can do this, to show that the Czech government has the ability to influence things on its own territory, Czechoslovak government, and to strike back at its invader and oppressor. And maybe the British have sort of indirectly repudiated the Munich Agreement in that they're now directly supporting these operations on Czech soil. Is it worth it? That's my question for the two of you.
Well, it's a tricky one as well.
I know.
I'm gonna sidestep this one slightly. So I'd love to hear what your viewers think about this. Leave a comment below. My comeback to this, I think, by still not answering the question, I might add, would be: is it worth it to who? I think that's maybe maybe a more tangible or tackleable question. To the people of Prague and the people of the Czech Republic, is it worth it? I think that's a really hard sell. What do they get out of it? They exchange one undoubtedly very bad guy for, to be fair, another bad guy in Frank, who ends up getting executed by pole hanging in Prague in front of 5,000 people at the end of the war. They exchange a bad guy for a bad guy, and they pay an enormous price in doing it. In terms of the bigger picture of the story of the Second World War and what happened as a result, and what could have happened had Heydrich stayed in and around those spheres for another 3 years, I think that's a more, you could argue that point with a little more vehemence. I think from that point of view, in terms of the grand strategic picture of the Great War. Done it again. In terms of the grand strategic picture of the Second World War, yeah, absolutely. You could argue, I think, that it is worth it. In terms of the price paid by the 7 men involved who lose their lives and the Czech people, incredible as it is in many ways, and a real sign of the determination of people in a very dark period of history, I think it's a much harder argument to make.
Well, I think I would subscribe to what you just said, Dan. So from a pure military point, at that particular time, I think it is quite doubtful whether it had any long-lasting, or perhaps even you might say positive effects. And we talked in length about the effects on these individuals, and also, of course, as you know, said a number of times, the people of Prague and the wider area. You might say, of course, you talked about the dark times. I mean, that's important. So it's a symbol. That is always important. You then have to weigh it up to say, is this symbolic meaning? Is that worth all the death and the extra suffering? We talked about Lidice and the other places as well. So you need to put that into context here as well. And as you said, even though Heydrich is dead, well, if he'd lived, well, the idea was he probably got moved on to France. That was one of the ideas, because resistance is getting a bit more active there. So that you might perhaps say, in some ways, it was best for the people of France that he was assassinated. When you look at the history of Prague and the area, well, it's also quite unfortunate in many ways, because this is one of the very small pockets that remains in German hands all the way till and even after the end of the Second World War. So even from a pure military point of view, there is not much there. All of this, say, I personally, it's a personal view, would say it did not really achieve an awful lot what it set out to achieve. However, there is the symbolic element. And of course, I mean, what's the other option? Not doing anything? That you don't win a war by not doing anything. And of course, when you do something, you don't know what the consequence and the outcome is. It could have gone a completely different way. We don't know this because it played out this particular way. But this does not take away anything of the bravery and the audacity of these people doing this. So I think you have to look at it, as you just did, Dan, at different levels.
Yeah, I don't think you sidestepped that at all, Dan. I think I wasn't necessarily looking for a yes or no, because often these questions of history are very hard to come down in a totally black, totally white, totally yes, totally no type of thing. And yeah, this is one of those messy questions, and that's why I think it's one of the ones that's worth asking. So I hope viewers and listeners out there that you're considering that question, that you go out there and read some reliable sources on, especially on those massacres. There's a lot more we could have said about the awful massacres in those villages. I think that's a story that's worth your time and attention. So I think we'll close up on the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich at this point. I want to thank Dan for stopping by and being our guest and taking him away from his normal duties as co-host of our sister podcast on the First World War, Not So Quiet on the Western Front. If you viewers and listeners out there liked what you heard in our last couple of episodes, or in any of our episodes, you can help us keep doing that if you become a supporter of the podcast, and we'd love to have you in our supporter community. You can go to bothsidesofthewire.com to find out more. You can even get access to exclusive content that's not available on the regular podcast. We've done things like tell the story of how Matthias came into possession of Marshal Tito's razor. For example, we've talked about our favorite books and why about the Second World War. Those kinds of things are in the War Room for exclusive content. You can get a free trial there by using the code DeepDarkWoods. So that's it for today's extended episode. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one. You've been listening to World War II, Both Sides of the Wire, a Battle Guide production. To support the creation of future episodes, consider joining our dedicated supporter community, where you can enjoy exclusive benefits and connect with like-minded individuals. For more information, please see the show notes, and if you appreciated this episode, please leave a review on your chosen podcast platform. Thank you for listening.
The SS and the Gestapo in their post-action reports here fall out over who's actually responsible, who did a good job, who made all the fuck-ups, and they von Treuenfeld and Panowitz are really getting a bitter. We've got both reports, super bitter arguments where they're blaming each other. The SS saying, "Look, why were the Gestapo there anyway? They shouldn't be involved. This was a military action," and the Gestapo saying, "Look, these guys just try and shoot everything. Why didn't they use their brain?" You know.